And we're live. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. It's evening for one of our panelists today, so that's pretty cool. Welcome to Spec Women Chat. I'm Diane Morrison. I'm your host. And we have a really great panel today. I'm very excited. Our topic is urban fantasy. I'm a fan of a lot of these writers, so I've just been waiting for this eagerly. We're still expecting 2 more panelists who hopefully should be showing up, but we are getting started because we're running late on start time. And introductions, we will start on the left with Carrie.
Hi, thank you for inviting me for this, and I apologize, my webcam is not working, but the microphone is, so I will be the woman of mystery on the panel. I'm probably best known for the Kitty Norville series of urban fantasy novels that ran for about 10 years and 14 novels and a bunch of short stories. I've also written lots and lots of other things. And once again, thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks for being part of this, Carrie. It's awesome. I really appreciate the fact you were able to make time to do this. So that's great. And then we have D.A. Smith.
Hello. My name's D.A., but I go by D. I just know that I'm a brand new writer. I published recently a urban fantasy called Stolen by the Ash. And it's just about a fox shifter who was taken by a werewolf. I currently live in Florida. I love the sunshine, but I would prefer some snow. But, you know, you get what you get. Thanks for having me so much.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's nice to meet you face to face. It's cool. Well, silhouette to face, I guess. But
yes, yes.
And then we have Elizabeth Bear.
Hi, that's me in the Velma sweater. Because there is snow here. I'm in New England. I write science fiction and fantasy, unsurprisingly, for a SFWA panel. And my interest in urban fantasy dates back to the 1980s when I discovered Megan Lindholm's book, Wizard of the Pigeons, and it just blew my socks off. So I am thrilled to be here and hopefully have some interesting things to say. Oh, and I have a book coming out in a month. It's called Ancestral Night, and it's science fiction. It's not urban fantasy.
By all means, tell us about your upcoming projects. We totally want to hear about it. That's great. I will give everyone a chance at the end of the panel to, what have you got coming up? Where are you, are there any appearances or whatever? But yeah, mention them as they come up too, Absolutely.
Go ahead and jump the gun, Bear.
No, good for you. You gotta do it, right? Like, you gotta, when you have an opening, it's so hard to
get it in there.
As a writer, you gotta do it. So, and thank you for teaching us that. I appreciate that. That's great. Next, we have Sarah Berman. You guys have seen her before.
Yes, my name is Sarah Berman. I write urban fantasy and pretty much everything else fantasy. My main urban fantasy series is the Runespells series, and that is based on Norse mythology and actually deals with a lot of mental health issues and things like that. And book 3 is coming out at the end of February. That's this month.
I'm very excited. Right. I have an advanced review copy and I can't wait to read it. I'm so excited.
Don't hate it.
And last but least for the moment, we have V.
Yes, hello. Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. This is really exciting. I've been nervous all day, but looking forward to it. Yes, my name is Violet, but I go by V Castro. I recently published my debut novel, Maria the Wanted and the Legacy of the Keepers. It actually follows a Mexican woman, a would-be immigrant turned vampire. So it will be a full series, but this is the first book in this series. And I also write vampire erotica. So, a bit saucy. Yes. And that was just released. So, yeah, I tend to go on the darker side of urban fantasy and into horror. So, yes, that's me.
Welcome. I'm so excited that you're
Thank you.
You come from us all the way in London. You told me it's about 8.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm in England, so and it's very cold, but I don't think it's New England cold. But yeah, it's in the evening, so that's why I was able to do this, because everybody's kind of asleep and taken care of. So thank you once again. I'm so glad I could make it.
Thank you. All right, so let's throw a topic out there and see, and run with it. Okay, I love urban fantasy. It's not something that I write, but it is something I read a lot of, right? So, what is it that you like best about urban fantasy? What is it that attracted you to writing in the genre? And just whoever wants to take it can jump in. It's totally cool.
I think the thing that I liked the best was the idea that you could bring in these paranormal and fantastical creatures and kind of set them in the real world. And, it's something that I find really fascinating. I really appreciate magical realism and things like that. So that's something that really appeals to me.
So it's not me.
That's the numinous breaking into the real world.
That's right. There you go. Perfect.
I really liked sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I really like about one thing about urban fantasy, which made me actually addicted to it, was the movie Underworld. And I was like, okay, there's a werewolf, there's a vampire, and they're in like New York City, they're in the real world. So then I got addicted to Blood and Chocolate. And when I read that, when I was I was like, I have to create this world for myself. So I love that being in the real world, being in that fantasy world, and having those two worlds collide. I love that part.
I absolutely agree. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go for it, sweetie.
I'll be quick. One of the things that I really love about urban fantasy is that that disconnect, right? The way that you can take something like drop a unicorn in Times Square to steal something that I've totally done. And that allows you to really adding that weirdness, that thing that is not sort of everyday life, sort of mimetic life, I guess, gives you the opportunity to really sort of throw a bunch of stuff that we all take for granted into relief. It's like a spotlight you can shine on human relationships and on toxic aspects of culture and on the way we interact with each other. And I find that's super useful. It's fun to write.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think it's a nice way to kind of free your mind and escape, but keep it tethered into the real world. So you still have that, well, what if moment. You still have that, it's just on the cusp of it could be real. And that's exciting. I really, really like that. I remember, and this isn't exactly urban fantasy, but I remember watching Gremlins, for example, when I was a kid. I was obsessed with Gremlins because, here's this normal family, this normal town, and this guy just walks into this random shop and this cute little thing, and he brings it home, and it's like chaos. Everything is normal, just as it would be for you, but then you've got creatures. And I think it's the same thing with like vampires and shifters and unicorns. And, it really just allows you to free yourself into a whole nother like dimension. But also, I think it also gives you the freedom to express things about life and the modern world. In my book, I did it to kind of shine a spotlight on immigration because it's something that is important to me, and being a woman of color, to kind of, untangle some of the emotions I have about that in today's world and society. And I have children, and what's their life going to be like? So I like that aspect, that you can take really difficult subjects and make them, you can help people digest them, and without being too preachy or pushy or turn people off. People can read these stories and be like, wow, I think I get something there. And if someone takes, feels a bit more understanding about another person because of it, well, that's great, And I know you mentioned about mental illness. I mean, that's great to shine a light on that and have it to where people actually have some understanding and compassion, which I think the world needs a lot of right now, is compassion.
Absolutely.
Violet, is there a romance aspect to your work at all?
There is, but not until later in the book. This is the issue.
You totally need to title the book "You've Got Creatures."
What Violet or V said, I've long supported the idea that fantasy and sci-fi are completely modern satire. They are how we do shine those lights on what is going on in the world, on the issues that we're seeing in the world, and creating these, it's fantasy, but it's a metaphor for what is going on. And, I consider that kind of a, like a divine quest that we all have, is to make sure that other people can digest these concepts in a way that it almost sneaks up on them when it becomes a real world issue.
Yeah, I feel like I fell into urban fantasy by accident sometimes, and it's for a lot of those same reasons. That there were a lot of books out there with vampires. I'd read a lot of books. There was a whole series that Mercedes Lackey wrote about elves and race cars. I don't know if anyone
The Serrated Edge.
The one she wrote with
them, and I found that a lot of the stuff I was reading that had magic and magical creatures in the real world didn't focus enough on the real world. And so I found myself drawn to the mundane side of it. I wanted to see what reality TV with vampires would look like. What would the congressional hearings look like? What is the army going to do with werewolves? Like, I just had all of these questions about what would it really be like? And that I found that not a lot of the stuff I was reading was focusing more on the magical. And I was much more interested in I want to know, like, is that guy working at the 24-hour convenience store really a vampire because it's the only job he can get? That kind of thing.
Yay! Stina was able to join us. Cool. I'm so sorry about the mix-up. I understand there was a confusion of time zones.
Yes.
Yes, I hear you. I do not see your face yet. I don't know, but that's okay. Carrie is having trouble with her camera too. Oh, there you are.
Here I am.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
I got everybody to kind of do a brief, hi, this is who I am, and this is why I'm here kind of thing. This seems like a good opportunity to get that from you.
Okay. I'm Stina Light. I just turned in my 5th novel. My first 2 novels were urban fantasy set in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Which would be like the 1970s. So technically, and most of it was set in Belfast. So technically that's urban fantasy.
Yeah, fantastic. You haven't missed that much. The question that we were just finishing up on the board was, what is it that attracted you to urban fantasy? Why did you want to write in it?
I am a big fan of Charles DeLint and Holly Black and that whole arm of the genre. Have been for very, very long time. So that's what attracted me to it the most. One of the reasons why I decided to write what I did was because there was so much being done with fairies in set in the United States, I decided I wanted to ship them back home and tell a story that's actually set in Ireland. So, and tell the story in a way about the fairies the way the Irish think of the fairies, not the way Americans think of fairies. So that's what really attracted me to it. I really enjoy stories where the city is actually a character. That's a lot of fun too. Yeah, and I like modern fantasy. It's a lot of fun.
I totally want to read your books. I've seen them and I thought, oh, this cover looks interesting, but it doesn't portray as much of that urban aspect, I think, as is clearly part of your work.
The cover is very soft looking, and the story itself, the main character is, he's a Catholic who thinks his father was a Protestant that got his mother pregnant and then vanished. In reality, his father is Bran of the Fianna and a Puka. So he's half Puka, doesn't know it, gets pulled into the troubles, becomes a wheelman for an IRA bank robbing unit, and everything goes horribly, horribly awry. So it's a lot gorier and there's, you know, blow torches and torture and crime. And which the cover really fooled a lot of people. There's prison. Yeah. So it fooled a certain group of people who were very upset that it wasn't some soft, fuzzy, happy thing. But
see, now if there are any publishers, marketers watching these programs, which I hope they do, I don't think that's fair, man. I don't think that's fair, right?
Oh, it did well. I mean, it was up for Campbell Award. I was up for a Campbell Award twice.
Fantastic. And
also a Crawford Award as well. So, I mean, it did well. It's not like it didn't.
I guess they knew what they were doing for the marketing, but you know, I was teasing Kat Rambo about this, right? Because she writes this odd steampunk gaslight fantasy thing, right? And the covers are just these pretty pictures with planets, and you know, you get the idea. It's fantastical. And I'm like, okay, you know what your cover should be is a severed unicorn head bleeding on cobblestone. Okay. You would be warned, right? Which I'm cool with. I mean, I like that kind of thing. I think it's great when the stakes are really high. And,
oh yeah,
you know, horrible things are happening and people have to do things to put a stop to it. So I would be more likely to pick up that book, not less, myself.
Right? Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And we could have a whole discussion about urban fantasy covers in general and whether or not they do what they're supposed to do. Because especially, you know, kind of in the mid-aughts when it was really starting to take off, there was a lot of flack directed at the covers and the tramp stamps and the leather pants and the back facing over the shoulder that a lot of times didn't necessarily have anything to do with the books, but they sold books because that audience identified those covers from that kind of artwork. So, you know, however much they all kind of looked the same and however much they didn't maybe necessarily represent what was in the book, it was kind of an amazing marketing tool.
That's a good point that you brought up, especially with the over-the-shoulder look, the tattoos. It makes me think of Patricia Briggs' novel series, where you're just pulled in just because of the picture, just because of the cover of the book. And a lot of times you get books where you feel like the cover just didn't fit, or sometimes the cover just makes you feel like, you know, I kind of want this to happen in the real world, but I know if it happens, I would be mortified, you know?
Yeah, I started thinking of those covers more as a trademark than, you know, actual content.
That's true.
I mean, that's it exactly, right? That the cover of a book is not an illustration of the content of the book. It's it's a marketing package designed to make the reader pick the book up or click on the book and read the back cover copy. And then if you're lucky, they open the book up and then the author's job begins. Finally.
Yes.
They look
I
at
think
the first
it's there to
sentence.
I think it's there to
Yeah.
help set an expectation for the reader, you know?
Yes.
So I feel like my cover let me down in that it set the wrong expectation.
The art is beautiful. The art's amazing.
The art is gorgeous.
Yeah.
The artist was super nice. I loved everything about he sent me all sorts of sketches and stuff. It was really cool. I just felt like it lied to the reader about how violent contents were. You know what I mean?
I think that's a really good point because, you know, like you guys have said, the cover isn't supposed to be an illustration of the book, but I think that readers much more appreciate it when the cover represents the kind of emotional mindset of the book. You know, it's like, it doesn't have to be an exact representation, but it needs to be kind of a metaphor for the overall tone of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of my the British editions of some of the Kitty books, they did something brilliant that I wish would get adapted everywhere because urban fantasy covers so much ground and that it is hard to know sometimes if you're going to get something that's more romantic or more erotic or more funnier or more action oriented. So they actually had kind of icons, you know, humor, you know, a smiley face with fangs for humorous. If the content was more erotic or less erotic, they just had this kind of graph on the back with check marks showing what the book was. So like the Kitty books were humorous and adventurous. And you know, someone else's book would have been more erotic and et cetera, et cetera. And I thought that was just great. And I wish everybody would do that because then you would know exactly what you were getting.
Because urban fantasy, as we know it, really is 4 different genres kind of mashed together, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's the sort of classical Charles DeLint, Emma Bull, Peter Beagle stuff. There's the hard-boiled noir Jim Butcher stuff. There's the stuff that edges over into paranormal romance, and then there's all of the stuff in the middle. The stuff that is more like the you know the quintessential tramp stamp urban fantasy. I actually sort of wish I'd gotten the tramp stamp covers on my books because I think they would have done better. But it's hard because you say urban fantasy and nobody knows what you mean.
Well, every single urban fantasy panel I have ever been on starts with a 15-minute discussion of what we're actually talking about, and nobody can ever decide.
Yeah.
I actually really struggled when I wrote this book to where it would go in anywhere. How would I say, well, what did you write? What kind of book is it? I was like, I don't know. it really, because there's a lot of it that is classic horror that is really dark. I mean, you've got trafficking, you have, you know, she's working in a maquiladora and they get attacked. You know, I graphically describe what happens, you know, as, you know, these women get attacked in the factory. But then you have that fantasy aspect because there is a greater organization of vampires involved, and then it just goes off. But it really is difficult to define. And as a new writer, I was at a loss, but I just knew I had to go with it. I had to do it. And, you know, I'm not ashamed of that being a genre mashup because I think, you know, when you have something to say and you have a story to tell, you know, don't limit yourself. Tell your story. Like, let your voice be heard, especially as women and women of color. You know, I think that should trump any kind of genre or trying to pigeon your story into any kind of like little blurb. I know it's important for marketing and everything, but you know, I don't want women to say, well, I think I need to scale this so it fits into this or this or this box. I think we should just go for it and just write our truth and just let it be out there and let the readers decide.
Well, fitting things in boxes is not the job of a writer at all. It really isn't. That's up to marketing to decide how things fit on a shelf. And the bookstore. That's their job.
But
Your job is
the indie writers
write.
have to do that job, though, right? The indie writers have to do that job, right? They have
sure,
to do it.
unfortunately, but that's their choice. But traditional writers don't. That's not your job. Is to write. Your title is writer. You write. So don't worry about what is popular, and don't worry about whether or not it fits in this box or that box. That, to me, that's creativity limiting, and that's not a positive thing at all in any way.
No, I agree with you there. Sarah has been trying to say something for a while. I think her mic has been unmuted, so I'd like to give her a chance.
Well, not particularly, but I've said for years now that your genre isn't what you've written; it's where they shelve it on the bookshelf, and your blurb isn't what your story is about; it's why the reader should read it.
Sarah's got a great video on her channel. She does stuff particularly geared towards indie writers, but any writer, I think, can benefit from it. And it's a really good little video on how all that works. What, the cover is an advertisement, right? And the blurb is a marketing package. So yeah, worth checking out. Sorry. Okay. Someone else was going to say something. There's so much in here that I could go.
Is it okay if I circle back for a second to something that Sarah and Carrie were talking about a while ago, and the conversation sort of went in a different direction?
I'm going to at some point myself, so by all means.
Okay, you guys were both talking about urban fantasy as metaphor, and one of the things that it seems to me that it's, and possibly one of the reasons why it's so popular with women, is that a lot of stuff in urban fantasy can serve as metaphors for family dynamics and relationships. And I'm thinking in particular of, the asshole werewolf boyfriend trope, right? We've all had one, whether it was a boyfriend or something else, but the person who seems perfectly normal and possibly even wonderful, and then every so often they become irrational and uncontrollable and dangerous. And that concretizing that metaphor can be really useful. Like it allows us to talk about things that are sort of baked into our society that are really weird, but nobody questions them. And we can re-weird them and be like, no, this behavior pattern is monstrous, like literally monstrous, and put that on the page. So I think, thank you guys for bringing that out, because that really made some stuff click in my head.
The vampire trope too, right? We've all had that guy, right? Who just wants everything, right? He wants it all. He wants everything from you. He, you think, oh, he loves me for me. And what he really wants is for you to be, his foil, right? And complete him, right? We've all had that as well. And well, yes, we need to look at it from a different lens sometimes. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
It's a step. Oh no, it's a step further even than that. The whole vampire boyfriend is the I can change him. He's dangerous to everybody else, but he'll be wonderful to me because I'm special. And that's a trope that does not get examined, I think, as much because it's a fantasy. There's a fantasy there that's at the core. But that is very ripe, I think, for examination, and it is a good way to play those out. But a lot of times I think we aren't very conscious of it because there is that fantasy element there. And another aspect with the whole vampire versus werewolf thing, the love triangle between the werewolf and the vampire thing, and people are always asking me, why aren't werewolves as popular? And there's a class issue there, that the vampires are always represent the aristocrats, the nobility, and werewolves are blue collar, working class, violent, rough, not as refined. And those get played out as well sometimes in ways that we're not always aware of, that are just super interesting watching those play out.
That's a great point. I totally agree with that. That's excellent.
I think I'm going to ruin something for Diane here, but
Uh-oh.
one trope that I actually do use in my Runespell series is the assignment. She's not a chosen one. She's assigned a quest, and because she is a she, it ends up being a responsibility and onus that she cannot get away from. And that's something that a lot of women find themselves stuck in adulthood. You know, they're kind of trapped by their responsibilities in life. And, you know, going back to the vampire boyfriend trying to take everything, you know, who hasn't had a guy who just practically wants you to think for him and feel for him and all the other things that he doesn't want to actually expend energy on. And we feel responsible to do that because society's kind of geared towards that. So, you know,
almost like you're sucked dry.
Right.
Oh.
So when a quest is constantly wearing down somebody, you know, it is a metaphor for the way that these life issues can just wear people down and create real issues for them.
To be fair, these things do happen in lesbian relationships too, right? Like I've had a relationship with the vampire girlfriend, so I can identify with that one. And I hear a lot of stories about the werewolf girlfriend a lot, right? And that's something that we don't talk about, right? Because I think it's because it's so hard to fight for acceptance for homosexual relationships in the first place that everyone wants to pretend that it's all just rosy. And of course it isn't, because humans are humans and we act the way we do. And yeah, there's destructive relationships. And I often find that in a lesbian relationship, you'll end up spending more time where you would have quit in a heterosexual relationship because you're afraid you're never going to get another chance. Right. And, you know, that's rough. And we should talk about that. That's a thing. Right. So not to blame the guys all the time. Right. Just saying. Yeah. If I can come back to something, right. Elizabeth was discussing how we're writing it's four different genres, basically. Right. I agree with that observation. I was trying to find ways to classify them, right? That Charles DeLint thing is kind of like re-enchanting the mundane world, right? And then noir is all the noir aspect, the Jim Butcher is almost the reverse, right? Where it's like grounding the fantastical, right? And then there is that romance element. Now, I know a lot of you also do write what stuff that would be considered paranormal romance or stuff that would be considered sort of on the border between the two. In general, do you feel that there is a lot of overlap, and do you think this is a good thing? And I ask this not because I have any judgment on it, but because sometimes, as we discussed in the speculative romance panel, there is a sort of a stigma on romance fiction and people don't take it as seriously. And I'm wondering if that affects urban fantasy, if you wish it hadn't, or if you think that the whole idea is stupid in the first place. You know, just curious.
I actually just released an erotic novella, and it's the erotic modern life of Malinali the vampire. I don't know if any of you know who Malinali is. She's also known as La Malinche. She was the Nahua slave given to Cortez during the conquest. And it's because of her translations and her diplomacy with the indigenous populations that the conquest kind of happened. She is, you know, by her own people considered a traitor. But she was a kid when she was given to a man, you know, at least 15 years older than her. She had no choice. So I've taken this character, this Nahua woman, who a lot of people don't know a lot about, but was incredibly important. And I've brought her into 2018, and she is having fun. She's living her life. She's an antiquities dealer. And yeah, she's, it's an erotic life. So I think, you know, it's nice to be able to kind of create these people and once again, she's a vampire because there's no way to take her from, you know, the 16th century to 2018 to live this fabulous life if she isn't, you know, a fantasy. But I've created a fantasy life for her, and I take it very seriously because I have the ability to take this woman that I feel is incredibly important and not a lot of people know about, and maybe people will know about her. Maybe people will read more history because of her, and be more interested in the conquest of Mexico because of it. And I enjoyed writing it.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, I was done. Go ahead.
No. I like your point that you brought up, and it made me think of the question again about how paranormal romance and urban fantasy is kind of easy to mesh them together almost, where urban fantasy feels like you're just focusing on the environment where the individuals are living in, and paranormal romance, you're focusing on lovers, you're focusing on two creatures coming together in order to form either a marital bond or some sort of bond, even if it's like the mate bond, which is really common with werewolves and shapeshifters and things like that. And it's kind of weird because I feel like my book, Stolen by the Ash, it's almost like it's trying to be a urban fantasy, even though, and it is an urban fantasy, but it has a romantic element to it. So am I wrong for adding that romantic element? And I'm thinking about that as a new writer. Is that wrong? No. Should I add less? Should I put more into it? And even with some science fictions, I know some of you ladies write science fiction. There has been more of an uptick of where you see more paranormal elements in science fiction. So now it seems like genre is almost not becoming as important anymore. I believe Sarah mentioned that it's just a place to put the books in the store, whereas your own heart, and you're putting it out there for the world to read and to see and to acknowledge, actually.
Actually, there's a reason why science fiction and fantasy are always lumped together, because that particular division has always been slippery. It's always been that way since, you know, the very beginning. So I believe you put whatever romance is in the story, right? I use romance as a secondary plot quite often. I don't focus in on them as the major plot. I believe that urban fantasy is about people and their relationships to one another and their relationships to reality and how they make their way through both worlds, as it were. But the thing that I have a lot of trouble with is that as a writer, I'm a woman, so there seems to be some sort of social requirement for me to write about romance that I resent. So when my first book came out, it's very heavily influenced by Irish crime novels. And so, I mean, there is a romance element to it, which doesn't end well, which was the other part of the thing, the set expectation, because in romance world, your romance is supposed to have this happily ever after, and mine absolutely does not. So it's just, I feel like romance is something, if you are drawn to write it, you should get respect for it. And if you enjoy it, that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, I deeply, deeply resent the social pressure for women to always write something that is related to romantic relationships. I deeply resent that.
I just like writing about sex.
Hey, you know, you like writing about sex, great. Good for you.
I went for straight up erotica. I was like, yeah, she likes him, but she likes something else. I just went for the good stuff.
Sure, that's great. Do what you want. That's great. I just resent it being some sort of socialized requirement.
Yeah. Because a few years ago, when the panel equity movement kind of started to make sure that there were equal men and women, equal numbers of men and women on panels at science fiction conventions. I got asked about it a lot, which is when I realized that being on a lot of urban fantasy panels and strong women character panels and young adult panels, most of the panels I was on were all women.
Yes.
So it wasn't that all of the panels were just men. It was that the panel topics were being segregated, and that men were ending up on science, hard science and hard science fiction, and women were all ending up on, paranormal romance and urban fantasy and young adult and, quote unquote, since you can't see me, quote unquote, strong women character panels. And that, so there's a kind of a deeper issue there of the expectations and what people are.
And you see that
expected to write and read. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You see that to this day.
So, I write alternate history, I write weird westerns, and I write space opera. I feel your pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What Dee was saying about Dee, you were saying like you were feeling as a new writer uncertain, like how much romance you're allowed to put in. Is that? And I just wanted to say that, I think probably one of the first urban fantasy books is Peter Beagle's A Fine and Private Place, which I think is like 1969. And the entire plot tension in that book comes from a pair of romances. So I think you're fine.
You tell the
you can just tell him Peter Beagle did it first. Yeah.
Well, not to mention Lila the werewolf. And I mean, there's... And this is just it, not to get too far down this track, because we could probably go down there a long way, but men and women are both writing romance. It just gets called something different when men write it.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I like to think of it as, think of how much respect rock and roll gets, and what the hell is it all about? It's erotica, right? Women write about erotica. It's poo-pooed. But men write about erotica, poetry about erotica, and there's this whole massive industry of cool that goes with it, right? So there's that. I also want to point out that on this panel about urban fantasy, how many men do we have on this panel?
Well, we don't, because this is Spec Women Chat, right? That's the only reason why.
I wasn't clear on that. Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, absolutely. And there will be an urban fantasy panel for the other program, which is called The Panel. And that will happen. Probably not for a few months, but I absolutely do intend to do it. I would be very interested to compare. I'd love to have some of you back. That would be really cool.
Cool. I just thought I'd call us out on that.
Yeah,
Sarah,
good. Call the women's.
Yeah, she's grinning. Hey, Sarah, go ahead.
To jump off on what pretty much everybody has been saying, okay, so your book is a place where they stick it on a bookshelf, but your book is also where readers find your book, and they will judge your book based on what else is on that bookshelf. Mm-hmm. And so I also write erotic romance, and I mean steamy stuff. Like this is, I'm not old enough to read it. But the thing that bothers me about the whole paranormal romance urban fantasy mesh is that there isn't enough delineation. I write urban fantasy that has exactly zero romance with a female main character, and that frickin' confuses people. Like, they don't know what to do with it. They're like,
yeah,
but she's not a real character if she's not screwing somebody. Well, what?
Yeah.
You can't be a real female unless you're trying to get in somebody else's pants.
Yeah, she doesn't have time for that.
Right.
So shady.
Books.
Well, that's why I wrote Persephone Station. It's a space opera, and there's no romance in it. So,
by the way, I was actually told this by a Hollywood producer who was giving a workshop on, or it was a conference speech on submitting your work as a screenplay. And he literally told me there was no way anybody would ever touch my work because she doesn't have sex.
Oh,
Yeah, and
two words. I don't know if I can say this on live chat or not, but fuck that.
That's right.
The best part was that he then tried to tell me that this was because it was the women in the audience that wouldn't like it.
Wrong. Bad answer. I'm all over stories about women that aren't specifically romance.
But the thing is, that's where, like, the people who have the power and the authority and the the systemic control of these things, that's where they're coming from. That's what they think.
But that's changing.
It is changing. But
Hollywood is so times.
When you have mashups like this without a clear subcategory, it can just muddy those waters and slow that down.
Okay, it's not urban fantasy, but did you guys see that movie Peppermint?
I did not.
No.
Okay, that is a fantastic movie. It got raked over the coals in reviews by critics because of exactly that kind of crap.
It just came out last fall, I think.
Oh, yeah, last year. Okay, here's the plot.
Jennifer Garner's revenge thriller.
Yeah. It's suburban housewife has her family destroyed by gangs. The judge is corrupt. The cops are corrupt. They don't do anything about it. So she goes underground, trains for 5 years, turns herself into this kick-ass killing machine that, could definitely take on John Wick. I don't know who would win, but they both, right? And just goes and lays waste, right? And of course, she had no romantic relationships. She has no time for that. She's out to get this gang, right? And the judge that let them go and all this other stuff, right? So, and it's weird because the audience liked it, right? Of course. But the official Hollywood critics did not. So yes, it does appear to be that dichotomy there. I couldn't help but notice that if you change nothing else in the plot, just the gender of the main character, you
got the Punisher.
Yeah, you've got the Punisher. That's right. And everybody thinks it's cool, right? Yeah, you've got exactly the Punisher. You're so right. That's exactly it. So yeah, and it makes me mad, right? It makes me mad because I like those kind of things. And they even went to great effort to not do the kind of things that people tend to criticize in these action flicks. Stuff like, okay, she's smaller than most of her opponents, right? So she doesn't kick their asses across the room, right? She gets a set of brass knuckles and she punches them in the face, right? And smacks them against the wall with her leverage, and stabs them in important places. It's a realistic thing. Someone who does martial arts casually, right? I'm 5 feet tall. This is the kind of stuff I have to do to equalize a playing field, right? So I thought that was fantastic, and it still wasn't sufficient, right? So, and because of that, okay, it doesn't sound like it relates, I guess, but of course it does, because often urban fantasy are things like crime novels, right? And detectives and cops, right? And you do get that same kind of thing going on. And, why should we be defined by what relationships we're in? It's nonsense. I don't know. I had to throw that in there. I've been looking for an opportunity to complain about that, I guess. But, you're right, Sarah. You're right. It's a problem. And the world needs to change. And I agree. It is changing. And fuck that, I'm totally with Stina, too. Yeah. Yeah. We're getting close to quitting time here. Were there other points that people still wanted to bring up based on what is? I accidentally interrupted someone. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking about, with me again, once again, I got to put in this plug. I'm a new writer. So one thing that comes up is the fact that women of color, like I have a small list of authors that I know exist that are African American or even British individuals who have Black backgrounds. Like, for instance, she's British. She's not an American citizen. She's never come from Africa or anything. I don't know about the back history, but she's British. She's Caribbean. My grandparents are Caribbean. So when I create my characters, especially for my future novel that's coming up, one thing I focus on is the fact that I want to see Black women. I want to see Hispanic women. I want to see women, if you are Caucasian, I want to see your background. Are you Irish Caucasian? Are you, it's not just African, it's not just American, it's not just African American. I love what Black Panther did, where they did not just show Black people in the ghetto or Africans that are kings. No, they showed you a whole entire world. And it also showed you the minute small issues with each culture and their scale. Like, for instance, poverty, gang violence. Black Panther was able to bring that up. And it wasn't between a white man and a Black man or a white woman and a Black woman. It was between two African Americans, two Africans, two Wakandians, people of the same blood fighting each other. And that's another thing on the bigger picture, on the bigger scale with our world today, the United States, everywhere. It's not just one race against another race. It's becoming to the point where it's like we're human beings, friends, family, fighting each other, and it's devastating.
Yeah,
but I like that urban fantasy can fight that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I want to see more where women of color and white women and everyone of various backgrounds and genders actually work together.
Yes.
I want to see more of that, and that's why I wrote the novel that I just turned in the way that I wrote it. It's 6 women of color and 1 white woman who never speaks. So it's, yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah. And these women of color all have different backgrounds. One is Nigerian. So I just want to see, more. Society pits women against women so much because there can be only one for whatever stupid reason. I just want to see more stories of women working together towards a goal. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually did that in my book. There's an organization, The Keepers, and, I have women from all backgrounds working together. They're all vampires. But nevertheless, they are not each other's competition. They're each other's, they're their family. And I really wanted to make an impact with who these women were, where they come from, what they experienced in life. And that was important to me. And all of my characters and everything I write are Latinas. That's incredibly important to me. So that's my culture. I want my daughter and other young girls, they can wait to read the erotica, but I want them to say, hey, if she can do this, I can do this. Look at this character. That reflects where I come from. That reflects my background. And
exactly.
I think that's a beautiful thing.
While you were talking, Ceresia made it. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Ceresia Glass. You may have to unmute your mic there. I see your picture, but I don't see your video, so I don't know if that was.
So I wasn't the only one who thought it started at 3.
I guess. I don't know. I'm so sorry. I try with this time zone thing. It's such a headache. It's. I will. I don't know, Ceresia, you need to unmute your mic there. I thank you for muting it while the background noise was going on, but. Okay, maybe she's having issues. I will, I'll yap in the lull here. I put out a call specifically for women of color for this episode because, okay, and look at this, right? It's still a very white panel, right? And okay, there's women of color are not getting the same press that white women are, right? This is a fact. Of course, there are all kinds of people of different backgrounds writing about this genre out there, about all the science fiction fantasy genres. But because the women of color are not getting the same kind of press, it's harder to hear about them. So I don't know how to contact people on Twitter, right? And that's where I do my primary, this is my call for this thing, right? And then Kat works the other end. Kat Rambo, president of SFWA, she asks people that she knows who are members of the organization if they want to get involved. And, hopefully that way we pick up people that people have heard of, right? Because indie writers, it's often you haven't heard of them, right? So, and then people watch the show. So I don't know. I want to see more inclusive stuff too, right? I live in Canada, right? I live like 4 hours drive from Vancouver, right? I don't know if, there is a lot of people of color here. This is not a hugely white place. I want to see more of that. I want Canada to look like the Canada that I actually live in, I don't want a whitewash world. I am not interested in that. I really can totally identify with characters from all kinds of different backgrounds. And the more culture we bring into it, in my opinion, the richer and the more interesting it is.
It's certainly more creative.
Absolutely.
Certainly more creative.
I agree.
Absolutely.
And this is how I read an article not long ago about how reading actually helps develop empathy. That's why I feel it's so very important to not have a whitewashed world.
Also,
because
go ahead, Stina. Sorry.
We need this empathy, and we need more empathy. This world is not suffering from an overabundance of empathy right now.
No. Well, one of the best reviewed urban fantasy debuts of the last couple of years was Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse, who's a Native American writer. So I think I've heard a lot of scuttlebutt about like whether or not urban fantasy is dead and whether or not it's marketable and whether or not you should even try to write it or market it. And the first thing I tell people is, well, if you're writing urban fantasy and you're worried that urban fantasy isn't getting bought by publishers anymore, just call it something else. Call it contemporary fantasy, call it dark fantasy, call it something else. I mean, it's all marketing labels anyway. But the second thing is one of the things I'm seeing that publishers really are looking for things they haven't seen before in urban fantasy. And one of those is the diverse authors and characters, because it doesn't look like everything that's come before, which is one of the problems with urban fantasy, is that so much of it starts looking cookie cutter. So I do think publishers are, at least to some extent, and based on what I've, the great reception that Rebecca's book got. And yeah.
Okay, I hear Theresia and I see her picture.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I'm such a noob at this. Can you guys even hear me?
I can now. Hello.
Yes.
Hi.
I'm sorry. I'm still at work, and I'm actually outside on the campus, so there's a lot of ambient noise behind me. So I apologize for that.
It's fine. Actually, the seagulls are nice. It's cool. Okay, I'm so sorry. I guess there was some confusion over the start time about this. You weren't the only one who was confused, if that was the case. So thank you for making the time, even though you are still at work. Can you give us a brief kind of, this is who I am and this is why I'm here?
Sure. And you did pronounce my name right. I'm Theresia, and I write paranormal romance and urban fantasy with Egyptian elements in it. I've been a long time fan of ancient Egyptian mythology. I've gone to, here in Atlanta, there's the Carlos Museum that has a very extensive Egyptian collection. And I've gone there, I've taken classes, I've done research. Anytime there's any kind of documentary on, I've watched it. I've got tons of books and stuff. So it's a lifelong fascination. And I'm just really excited that I've been able to add that into my writing. So even in my urban fantasy, my Shadow Chasers series, my heroine worships Mot, and the hero in that is a 4,000-year-old Nubian who is Isis is his patron. So being able to put their kind of beliefs and their belief structure into my writing has been pretty awesome. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
I see that Sarah and I were both smiling here. Sarah writes a series where it's the Norse pantheon that are the focus, and she and I are both neo-pagans, I happen to know. So I'm always up for different belief systems in urban fantasy. This totally sounds like my cup of tea. So cool.
Yeah.
We're actually getting towards the end of the program. I'm willing to hang out a little longer because you just got here and haven't had a chance to speak as much. But if other people do want to say goodbye, I only got you to agree to an hour, so that's your call. I will give people an opportunity, if they're going to bow out at this point, to tell us a bit about what they've got coming up, new books, their works in progress, places they're going to be. Anybody planning on heading out, or are we all in for the long haul?
I can hang out.
I got a few more minutes.
Yeah, okay.
I actually need to leave in about 20 minutes to pick my husband up, so
Okay.
I'll go ahead and my outro now and then just slip out when it's time.
Yeah.
So again,
Same here.
You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Sarah Berman Author, Author Goddess.
What are you on Instagram?
Sarah Berman Author.
Oh, that's it.
Sarah Berman Author or Author Goddess. That's the only. All of my books are on Amazon, either as Sarah Berman, or I do have a pen name that I use for my erotic romance. It's such a secret, I tell everybody. Lena Grace, and that's Greyce because I'm weird. I do have a book on pre-order for the release at the end of February. That's The Chains That Bind, book 3 of the Runespell series. I am hoping to have book 3 of the Hot Fae Nights series under Lena Grace released in the next few months. So essentially, if you find me on any social media, I respond pretty well. I have a vlog, Practically Writing, here on YouTube. Or is this? Wait, this is Google.
It's YouTube too. It's YouTube too. Yeah.
YouTube. It's a hot video. So, so yeah, if anybody ever needs to find me, just shoot me a holla. I'm pretty open about pointing people to things, so that's it.
That's great. I should ask before V does her thing, how much time have you got, Ceresia? Are you like on your break kind of thing?
I've probably got about 30 minutes, I think.
Okay. All right. In that case, V, it's yours. Let us know what you got coming up. And then that way you're free to go anytime.
Well, my debut novel, Maria the Wanted and the Legacy of the Keepers. So that's out now. That's book 1 and just released in time for Valentine's, guys. It's the first of a novella series. So it's a novella. It's quite small. It's we're talking about covers. I went a bit hot on this one. The erotic modern life of Malinali the vampire. I'll be at Stoker Con in May, which I'm really excited about. And yeah, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. And I actually have some book buying to do. It's going to be an expensive night because I can't wait to check everyone's books out. But this has been fantastic. I mean, I am so excited for everyone's projects. And thank you once again for having me. This was fantastic as a new writer. Dee, just go with it. Follow your gut. You can do this.
Thank
and all
you.
of y'all women are so beautiful. I can't wait to read all of your stuff. Looking forward to it.
It's great to meet you, V.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you so much for this.
All right, good night, everyone. Well, good night to me. Goodbye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, I guess we'll jump back in here. I'll ask Ceresia the question I started the night with, or afternoon, depending on where we are, right? Which is, what attracted you to urban fantasy, and why did you decide you wanted to write it?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I started reading fantasies, as a kid, and loved all of the, those were the movies I gravitated towards, the stories I gravitated towards. So it was, to me, that made more sense to write those kinds of stories, reading A Wrinkle in Time, reading all of the Anne McCaffrey things. It was just a natural progression for me to get interested in that. And then discovering, Egyptian mythology and having that stored, it just kind of together. So the more that I researched that, the more I wanted to kind of incorporate stories with that. And of course, I also wanted to see me in stories and see my friends and my sister and family, represented in stories like that. So it was a natural progression basically to get to the point where I could create those kind of stories and put characters that look like me in them.
Fantastic.
I agree with that.
What I was going to say earlier to build on what Stina was saying is that representation is huge, right? That there's something about seeing yourself in a story and knowing that other people see you in a story that makes you feel like you're a part of the narrative, a part of society, not erased, right?
Exactly.
And
you feel a little less weird, for the things that you're interested in when you can see yourself in those stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to bring up something very specific about representation that I just kind of want to bring it up for the feedback.
Okay.
I wrote a short story. I believe Diane has either read it or at least heard about it. Superpowers Anonymous. It's a superhero book. And I did an experiment kind of thing because there are some characters who are people of color. And I did not want to like skip over descriptions because then people might assume that they were white. But I also wanted to treat them the same way as all the other characters. So I looked at the way I was describing the characters of color and applied the same metrics to the white characters. So, describing hair colors and, skin colors and everything for everyone. And I actually had a critique group that called me on that and said that I was over describing these characters.
Really? Wow.
I haven't read
Talk
it
about
yet,
left
but
field.
I promise you I'll check it out. Yeah.
I want to bring up, there's a book called Writing the Other, written by Nisi Shaw and Cynthia Ward, and there's an associated class that's run by Tempest Bradford. So I really think, highly recommend that you look that up, read the book. It's a very thin book. It's not very big at all. It can be found on Amazon really easily. Highly recommend that you do that. I wouldn't rely on, if you're getting feedback from white people about how you're treating characters of color, I wouldn't rely on that feedback at all.
So, some to me, I asked one of my friends who actually read my stolen, actually is the first chapter of my new sci-fi Siphons, and she read it and she was like, oh my gosh, time I've ever experienced a Black character in a story and actually see like I felt like I was that character, because I've never read a story where there was an African American in this story that has curly hair and I always imagined the characters to be either like me, blonde, Midwestern, or Ted or something like that. And I was like, I just wrote it the way I would want you to see them. And I'm kind of glad that she saw my character and she was actually impressed by it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I kind of felt sad in the back of my head, only because I'm like, you get stuck with who you see. You think that your character is you, which until you get the description, which I get it, but at the same time, it's like it was a lukewarm feeling. I can't break in that, but it was just interesting to get that point of view. And she is Caucasian, and she was honest with me about it, and I liked her feedback, and I also didn't care for it. So it's weird.
Yeah. No, it's a very complex issue, right? Because there are a lot of details, very subtle details and very subtle differences that can be seen. For example, like you're saying, this heavy description only on the characters of color, that makes whiteness the default. And that's not a good thing to do. So that's why I'm recommending the book, because it addresses.
Oh, no. I wrote the white characters with as heavy a description as the characters of color, and I was criticized for that.
Right, and I think that criticism is incorrect.
It was weird because it's like, if you have white characters, then why shouldn't you describe their skin color in that? And I try to take a really light touch. It's not like I'm sitting there describing them as if they're in the mirror or anything. Just, like ashy gray hair.
Right. One of the details I think that should be, keep in mind the race of your character, right? If your character happens to be a person of color, then they're going to notice how someone else is pale long before they're gonna, because for them, you have to think in terms of what is normal for them, right?
Right.
And I think that is a useful way to look at it. But I definitely recommend that book. Definitely, because it's extremely helpful.
I will find a link and I will put it in the show notes. I make a habit once we're done of going through, and anytime somebody's mentioned something like that, I try to put a link, and I'll end up shortening your bios if necessary to make them fit. I hope that's okay, but
sure.
Yeah, but I will definitely find it, and you will be able to find that in the description. You got to give me a day or two to get that done, but I will.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there are very, very distinct cultural differences that you need to keep in mind too, that are connected to the different histories. So you need to keep all of that in mind. That's why I think it's important to have a sensitivity reader, because you're not going to catch all of that particularly if you're white. So, yeah.
Cericia, you didn't get a chance to hear my ground rules when we started, but basically jump in if you've got something to say. Absolutely.
Okay. Will do.
Okay, cool. I don't, and if you're not getting attention because, you got lag or something like that, wave your hand at me and I'll interrupt the conversation.
Okay, no problem. I was pretty much agreeing with what you were saying there. I think perceiving the other, showing the other characters through a particular character's eyes is a good way to describe them. I understand the trying to balance them out, and making sure that everyone's treated the same in the book. And when you're describing your characters of multiple ethnicities, and I know that that can make because so many people are used to the default being white, it can make them uncomfortable. And, it's, we're becoming more conscious of that. And part of becoming more conscious is being uncomfortable and getting out of the comfort zone. And I think that that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah. I totally agree.
I'm with you. Yeah. Okay. So I think we've about exhausted that because we're all kind of in agreement with how important representation is and trying to do it right. So great. There's a thing, right? Do you find that gender representation can be like that, right? Because I read a lot of stuff that's typically described as men's fiction, right? You know, I read Patrick O'Brien. I think this is great, right?
Me too.
So, and sometimes I get feedback with, you know, oh, well, you know, why would this be different for men and women because of this and that? And the truth is, my experience is that women are reacted to when they say the same things that men do in a different way, right? So,
Yes.
right. Do you guys feel that this is an issue? Is it an issue in urban fantasy in particular? And if it is this one reason why maybe women get pigeonholed as, you know, oh, you must write something about relationships?
I actually, oh, go ahead. Okay. What I was just going to say is that I think that gender representation, if it's unconsidered, can be super tropey. And also, that's another place where it helps to be aware of representation and to try not to erase people, and to be aware of the fact that not everybody identifies as a woman or a man.
Yes, another excellent point.
And that when you are, but you know, there's that whole thing about, oh, you can't write unlikable women, which I think is a total, pardon my French, but I think that's total bullshit. I can think of a number of very successful series that have really prickly female protagonists. I think that sometimes people write quote unquote unlikable women who are unlikable because they're awful people, and those are harder for readers to connect with. You know, the female character who creates all of her own there are also male characters who do this. This is not strictly a female character thing. The character who creates all their own conflict because they yell at everybody they meet.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh no. Well, the thing that gets me is she has to be unlikable to be strong. If she's going to be perceived as being strong, then she has to have all of these, you know, super defensive, angry at everybody. That
negative.
When that unlikability and violence is equated with strength, whereas other traits are not equated with strength, is where it starts to get, the gender essentialism starts to come in. Is that, you know, to be perceived as strong, she can't act like, you know, conventional femininity says she ought to act like, and that's where the unexamined, as exactly as you were saying, the unexamined assumptions there, I think, become problematic.
Yeah, and one of my least favorite tropes is the fighting fuck toy, is what I call it.
Oh, hey, yeah.
Just to finish my sentence, there are female characters. I'm thinking of like Sarah Paretsky's V.I. Warshawski. There are like 19, 20 books in this series now. It's been going for 30 years. And she's a very assertive, prickly character. But she's not that person who makes all of her own conflict. And obviously the readership for that is there. So no female characters don't have to be all nicey, and they also don't have to be these tropey nightmare people who you would never want to be stuck in an elevator with. You can actually write real people who are women, and readers will accept it. So I find myself sometimes having a great deal of frustration with this bit of writerly advice that floats around the internet unsourced, where, oh, you know, you can only write one type of woman if you want to have your book hope to be published.
I'm just going to ask if either Sricia or Dee wanted to say anything, because they've been quiet for a bit.
Let's see.
Yeah, again, I'm agreeing, because it's a bunch of bullshit. Women are multifaceted people just like men are, and we should be able to range of emotions. Somebody saying, oh, she's PMSing, or oh, she's a goody two-shoes, or she's the mama, or she's a harlot. It's ridiculous. And it gets me, I'm so frustrated by that.
I do have oh, go ahead.
Just a short little example. You know, you could drop a unicorn in Times Square, but a woman can't be aggressive.
Exactly.
Right.
Dude.
Now, I've had my character, now she doesn't have a bipolar or mental disability or anything like that, but she has times, just like normal women, where she's like, hey, I don't want to be bothered today. I don't want to be annoyed. And then she has other times where she's like, you know what? I do want to cuddle with you. I do want to fix you dinner or whatever.
Right.
She's not just pigeonholed into being sweetheart. She's going to kick someone's butt, but she's also going to make sure that your back is rubbed if she feels like rubbing it. And, you know, that kind of thing. So I agree with how you got to be careful with gender where you're making it seem like, she must love pink. She must be frilly. She must be girly. You don't have to do that.
And you don't have to go totally against pink or ruffles either, right? Like,
Exactly. You know. Can love both. You can have combat boots and your tutu.
I think that's Stina.
Exactly. That's me. That's entirely me.
I think I've seen that outfit actually. It looks good on you.
Yeah, actually, yes, I'm sure you have. Thank you.
Yeah, I think pink camo kind of, does a good balance there. But okay, that's just me. What would you guys like to see more of in urban fantasy? What are things you would like to see, and what are things you'd like to see less of? Maybe there's another question.
Well, something I've been enjoying, and I'm not even sure if this would count as urban fantasy at this point, but more historical. So the same sort of bedrock of magic and things in the real world, but 19th and early 20th century rather than strictly modern era. And like I said, at that point, that's getting into the fringes of the definitions of urban fantasy as that's like historical urban fantasy. I don't even know if that's a thing, but that's what I've been enjoying reading right now.
Yeah, that's what they called Of Blood and Honey because it was set in the 1970s. So, yeah.
I don't mind there be. Oh, sorry. No, I go right after me. Go ahead. But I was just saying, I see we've lost Teresia. I guess she probably had to get back to work, right? Please check out her website. Because she did not get a chance to do an outro about what is going on in her world right now, and the link is in the. Oh no, she's back. Okay.
Sorry, guys.
No, I thought we'd lost you. I thought you had to get back to work. So no, that's cool. How long do you have left? Just so I know.
Okay, yeah, I was getting on the van, and like I said, I suck at technology. I'm doing good to, post on Twitter and the Facebook and all of those things. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I'm sorry. Google Hangouts is new for me, so.
No, it's cool. You're doing really great, actually. I want to make sure you get a chance to speak before, and say what you need to say before you go. Are you getting close to the time where you have to leave?
I'm actually on the van pool. I just got on my van pool, so I'm probably going to annoy these guys for a couple of minutes.
Oh, that's great. Good. Okay. Well, maybe Dee was about to say something, and please hold that thought. But maybe I should give you a chance to give us kind of your, what you've got coming up. Appearances you're going to be at, where to find you, that kind of thing before the 0 hour happens here.
Okay. Well, I'm on all of the social media. If you can spell my first name, you can pretty much find me. SERESSIA. I'm on Facebook, Twitter. I just joined Instagram because, again, technophobe. And I'm currently working on a YA fantasy series set in ancient Nubia with twin princesses. So I'm really excited about this project, and hopefully I can get it sold somewhere.
That's fantastic. I look forward to that. Cool. Okay, go ahead, Dee. Sorry.
Oh, yes. So I want to see more body positive literature where we have, she could kick butt, but maybe when you say curvy, like I noticed curvy is said in a lot of fantasy novels, a lot of the romance novels, but when they say curvy, they mean like an hourglass figure. I want to see more like voluptuous, plump, you know, someone who's, and this could be just description, this could be just finding a book. I know that, like, for example, there's Precious, where she was morbidly obese, and it had to be broken down to the character. And even in my story, I'm not saying that my character's morbidly obese or anything like that. I'm just saying that she's a thick girl, she's a thickums, and she's not going to be able to do backflips and stuff like that. But at the same time, she's a fantasy character. I want her to do a backflip. I want her to do a handstand. I want her to be able to twerk or whatever, because I can do those things, but that's just me. So I want it to be like more body positivity, more focusing on not just thin frame, curvy frame. Let's do all the frames, you know?
As a recovered anorexic bulimic, I am totally with you. I have a big chip on my shoulder about that. Right? You know what? Fat does not mean unfit. People are quite capable of doing all kinds of things at all kinds of sizes. Why can we not have other sizes? Thank you. Yes, I agree with you completely. Right. So the question on the board was, what would you like to see more of in urban fantasy, and what would you like to see less of? I've stymied people.
That's a good question. I think there's so many areas that people of color have not been in this category. So there's things that are a lot of people would consider played out that we have not gotten a chance to do. So I think that it's important to be able to explore those, like the historical paranormals, space operas, you know, things like that, give our take on those settings and those parts of the genre. So I don't think that there's necessarily things that are overdone. I just think that there are different perspectives that need to be brought to the genre.
I'm absolutely with you there too. Yeah. I write a lot of Indo-Canadians in my stories because I do not see a lot of people of, you know, that part of the world that originates, like, you know, so many different nations. They're not represented. Brown people don't get a lot of representation. Black people are starting to get some, right? Asian people are starting to get some, right? But brown people are not. And I know a lot of brown people. This is what my Canada looks like. This is what where I grew up looks like. And I don't think it's right, because the future's for everybody. So, you know, I have some Jewish background, but yeah, I'm a white woman, so I run it by sensitivity readers, make sure I'm getting it right. But I try to do that because I want to see more of that myself, you know. And I don't care.
I mean, there's so much more than that European-centric folklore, I mean, that's out there. So it needs to be told. Own voices. Those stories and those myths just need to be explored. And I think that there's a bunch of tales there that can be shared and can be expanded and explored. And I think that people really should be given a chance to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree.
Anybody else have any thoughts on this subject?
I don't think I have anything to add.
Neither do I.
So the big theme I'm getting is, you know, get more representation for more different types of people. We don't think that the genre's played out yet. Yes, I realize there's been lots of paranormal detectives, but have you done a paranormal detective who's like a black lesbian who's 300 pounds? Probably not. Maybe you should. Well, seriously, maybe so. You know what I want to see is more disabled people in fantasy. Right? This is a thing. Right? My husband is disabled. I have a chronic thing myself. I have a PTSD diagnosis, right? And people never do PTSD right. They always, you know, like they're focused on the flashbacks and stuff, right? And my experience
or war movies.
Yes, and it has to be war movies, and oh, God forbid it should be from a relationship or an abusive childhood or something like that, right?
Actually,
now you're a wimp, right?
My main character in Of Blood and Honey has PTSD.
Oh, great!
Screaming, raging.
I'm fantastic.
PTSD.
I'm in. I want to see that because I want to see myself represented, right? I want to see my husband represented, right? He's got mobility issues. He has an artificial leg, right? Not much use of his left hand, and his right hand has some damage to it as well, right? I want to see, but okay, like he gets around. He does just fine.
Right.
If we're in a future with magic, why can't we have magical prosthetics? What's wrong?
There
with
you
that?
go.
Right. So I want to see that. Right. But the magical prosthetics won't solve all the problems. Right. Like I can tell you from personal experience, the leg has to come off at some point. Right. It sweats. Right. You need to, there's trouble with it. And then they can deal with that situation. Right. And then, because then you see into what really goes on in people's lives. And that's what I want more of myself.
Now, Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan, they did touch on the character Grover. He was a satyr, but he had a physical disability. So that was interesting
Good
take
point.
on the novel. And as a teenager reading that, it broadens your horizon. And even Percy Jackson's stepbrother or half brother, he had a form of autism. He was on the spectrum. So that was brought out too. So he did a good job with it, and it wasn't aggressive. Like he's not, it wasn't disrespectful, to say the least. They were able to be helpful, useful fantasy characters and someone you look up to as well.
That's a very good point.
Specifically, I would like to see more books with diverse casts that are not problem novels, that are not about overcoming being marginalized in some way.
Yeah.
That where the character's race or gender or sexuality or level of ability is not the plot.
Yes.
God knows we all have our own issues, and my issues are not the plot of my life. They may be a complication, but so
Totally
I guess I did
agree.
have something to add. What? Sorry?
I said I totally agree.
So I guess I did have something to add.
It's great. Well, I think probably we should wind this down. We've been an hour and a half now, I guess, according to when we started. And I would really like to thank you all for being here. Let's do the thing for those who haven't done it. What have you got coming up? Where are you got any works in progress you want to tell us about? Releases, places you're going to be?
So I currently have a sci-fi novel coming out on May 3rd called Siphon's a Novel. The character, she's plus size. It's a very diverse cast, and she's also African American. But I did a little twist. There's a biracial romance, which I think is love is love, if you ask me. But I went ahead and did that, and I have it on pre-order on Amazon, and Siphons is spelled with a Y. And that I also have a free copy of the book, the first chapter of the book on my website, D.A. Smith Writes, actually without the S at the end.com. So it's dasmithwrite.com. And you can get a free copy of the first chapter. And also you get a free copy of Stolen by the Ash, which is a Fox Shifter short story. So hope you guys enjoy that.
Fantastic. I will totally check that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Elizabeth Bear, I guess. This is Gurney. He's helping. His website is www.elizabethbear.com. And we have 2 books coming out this year. The first is Ancestral Night, which is out next month. That is a big idea space opera whose protagonist happens to be a lesbian of color, actually. And then I have a fantasy novel, an epic fantasy coming out in May called The Red Stained Wings, which also has quite a diverse cast. And you can find out more about them and about all of my social media presences at my website. Or Gurney's website. Sorry.
That's great.
Who's next?
Yeah. Carrie, why not?
Okay, I was going to say, are we going down the row, or I'll go next? My most recent novel is The Wild Dead. It's a post-apocalyptic murder mystery and a sequel to the novel Bannerless, which won the Philip K. Dick Award last year.
Congrats, by the way. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Congrats.
I'm so pleased. I'm still riding the high on that one. My next big thing coming out, I have a novella coming out in Asimov science fiction called Gremlin, that the more I think about it, it's a little bit urban fantasy and a little bit not. I'd be curious to hear what people think about it. It's kind of a generational saga about women pilots and the gremlin who is looking after them, starting in World War II and then moving far into the future. And I'm quite looking forward to having that out in the world and seeing what people think about it. All of my work, if you want more information, it's www.carrievaughn.com. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I guess that leaves Stina.
Really? Okay.
Well, I gave Cerisa an early chance, so yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was kind of waiting to be last. My name is Stina Light. The novel that I have coming out this year will be released in the fall. It's called Persephone Station. It's a space opera, a gender flipped Magnificent Seven on a certain level.
Cool.
So there's that. It has a diverse cast. Then I have a short story out that's actually, it does qualify as urban fantasy, come to think of it. It's called A Siren's Cry is a Song of Sorrow, but it's primarily about sexual abuse, so trigger warning on that. And that's all I have this year.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take the opportunity to, talk about my own stuff too, because, hey, why not? I'm Diane Morrison, and the big thing I've got coming out is an anthology. It's called Gunsmoke and Dragonfire, a fantasy Western anthology, which I've put together with 25 other authors, one of whom you guys heard it here first. Just because it's just brand new that this is happening, is Diana Paxson. She is contributing a story, and I'm so excited about it. We have really, it's quite, it looks like a bunch of white guys on the cover. I've been criticized for that, but it actually isn't, right? There's quite a diverse group of authors. It's all weird Westerns, sci-fi Westerns, and stuff like that. We have a Kickstarter running right now to fund the print variation, and the pre-order is available on Amazon for a reduced price until the end of February. So that's my big thing, and I hope you'll check it out, because I love it when the genres blend. That's one of the things I like about urban fantasy, is that, juxtaposition of the harsh realism and the enchantment, right? So thank you guys so much for doing this today and for rolling with all the various changes and punches and technical difficulties. I really hope you'll consider coming back sometime. I'd love to have any one of you again.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
It was great meeting you all.
Definitely a pleasure, ladies. Okay.
Thanks, everybody, for a really fun panel.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully we'll see you again soon, and thanks for joining us today. For those of you who are waiting for the show notes, check back tomorrow and it'll probably be up. All right, have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.